Hi folks, welcome back. So here we are, deep into 2025, where up is down, men are women, and the Democrats still think shouting Trump like it's Beetlejuice will magically make their relevance reappear. The country's on fire, sometimes literally thanks to them and their base. And instead of putting it out, they're lighting matches and blaming the smoke on Elon Musk. We've got a president who can stand upright without handlers, gas prices finally under control, and for the first time in years, the border's more secure than Hunter Biden's laptop. And yet, somehow, the left wants to rewind the clock and investigate Trump again, because apparently recycling isn't just for plastic, it's for failed narratives as well. So in today's clips, we're diving headfirst into the fever dream logic of modern Democrats, where justice is just a branding term, memory is selective, and accountability only applies to Republicans. So buckle up, because hypocrisy season never really ended.
If the Democrats take over after the midterms next year, the House and or Senate, do you think they're going to push for investigations into Trump's family and the whole crypto acquisitions that he is getting?
Oh my God.
Well, Alex, I'm glad you asked.
Oh, here we go.
Listen, so long as we end up taking the House, which I fully anticipate that we will do, and we are going to work hard to obviously help our Senate colleagues as well, then as someone who serves on the Oversight Committee and hopes to lead the Oversight Committee, I can guarantee you that we will do what we are supposed to do as constitutionally sworn members of the House, which means that we will conduct oversight. That means that we will investigate. We will look at whether or not this president himself has violated the emoluments clause as it relates to, say, such things as getting a $400 million plane from the Qataris. We also will make sure that we're looking into all these business deals that they have going on. I mean, think about it this way, Alex. They were going after Hunter because he sat on a board. Think about how much money they are raking in, whether we're talking about the next golf resort that they're setting up in Qatar, or whether we're talking about them leveling Gaza, as they've talked about how it would be great beachfront property, whether we're talking about this crypto scam, the scam that people didn't even want to walk into and show their faces. Let me tell you, there is no shortage of things for us to dig into and determine whether or not there have been not only violations of the law, but definitely violations of our Constitution as a whole.
This is mental illness, plain and simple, but not the kind that gets treated. No, this is the kind that gets elected, handed a mic, and given a committee seat. Jasmine Crockett, one of the left's loudest avatars of outrage, just promised that if Democrats, for some wild reason, ever happen to retake the House, they'll launch a full-scale investigation into Trump's so-called corruption again. Not because they've uncovered anything new, not because the country is demanding it, but because obsession is all the left has left. When power slips from their hands, they cling to fantasy. They call it oversight. Most normal, common sense Americans call that overcompensation. Now, to be clear, this isn't about justice. It's purely about performance. Crockett isn't speaking as a constitutional watchdog. She's auditioning to extend her role on MSDNC. This is the new currency of the activist left. Grievance cosplay wrapped in legalese. They've built an entire political identity around resistance theater, where every Republican win must be illegitimate, every Trump deal must be criminal, and every policy disagreement must be a threat to democracy itself. Now, Crockett rambles on about emoluments, Gulf business deals, crypto scams, and beachfront property in Gaza, as if stringing together enough buzzwords will retroactively justify her delusion. But here's the thing, if Trump's Qatar jet or crypto ventures genuinely violate the Constitution, then investigate them with facts, not headlines. But we know that's not actually the point. The left isn't seeking truth, they're seeking revenge, spectacle, airtime. This is prosecution by implication, not evidence. And it's become their go-to strategy because they've run out of persuasive ideas and they have no policies. This moment reveals just how deep the rot goes in the Democrat Party, because when they lose elections, they don't recalibrate, they don't think of their platform, they just retaliate. It's not we lost because our policies are awful. It's we lost because Republicans cheated and Trump, whatever. That's why they cling to January 6th like it's the Kennedy assassination, inflate Trump's business deals into global conspiracies, and call every conservative judicial ruling an attack on human rights. The narrative must never allow for legitimate opposition. To them, Trump isn't just a rival. He's an alibi for everything they can't deliver themselves. Meanwhile, real issues like crime, inflation, education, the border, barely register in their rhetoric. Why do you think that is? Because confronting those failures would expose a hollowness of their platform and how much they're failing around the country in places they've had blue lock for decades, like California and Los Angeles. So obviously they retreat into their comfort zone. Trump, 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 and more Trump. Crockett's meltdown isn't just an outlier. It's quite literally the blueprint. Distraction over direction, accusation over any sort of real accountability. And in reality, this is also a cautionary tale about the institutional decay of Congress itself. Oversight is supposed to be a tool for truth, not a toy for tantrums on MSDNC. But over the last decade, Democrats have turned committees into cable news sets. What used to be a branch of government is now just a content farm for them. And the audience isn't the American people, it's donors, journalists, and their social media followers. The louder the Democrat meltdown, the faster the fundraising email that follows it. Ultimately, what we're witnessing is what happens when you build an entire movement on resentment instead of responsibility. When your only platform is fear of the other guy, eventually the crowd stops listening. And all that's left is the echo of your own delusion amplified through a dying media class that's just as lost as your party. In the end, Crockett's rant isn't even about Trump. It's about how Democrats can't admit they've lost the plot. And until they do, they'll keep spiraling, screaming into microphones, lighting narrative fires, and calling all of that justice. But common sense Americans are watching, and we're not fooled as easily. And speaking of fools, these BLM activists have a lot to say.
What are white people superior at?
What exactly are white people superior at?
They're real good at violence.
Violence. Genocide.
It's like stealing people's lives just because they feel like it.
If you are white and you know this is happening and you say nothing, then you're a killer too.
What exactly are white people superior at?
Insecurity. Pretending.
Fear.
Being fearful of nothing.
Being ignorant.
Blame.
Letting their egos control their every move. Superior at being dicks.
What exactly are white people superior at?
Oppression. Gaslighting.
Lack of empathy.
Intellectualizing oppression. Did I say oppression?
What exactly are white people superior at?
Taking what's not there. Taking shit.
Taking our ideas.
Copycatting.
Gentrification.
Appropriating things that do not belong to them.
Taking over other people's cultures and making you believe that they invented it.
Maybe they're thinking of it as repurposing. It's like recycle and repurpose.
As my grandma would say, them white folk, they'll take it if you don't copyright it.
They are very good at destruction of land, destruction of people, destruction of humanness.
Republican, whether you're Democrat, whether you're conservative, like white people are really good at upholding white supremacy.
How about claiming that, they are actually a whole separate race, when actually white DNA comes from the black female?
So what exactly are white people superior at?
Honey, lying, stealing, and cheating.
Manipulation.
Withholding information.
Lying, telling lies.
This video is why black fatigue exists. The sheer level of delusion is exhausting, not because it's challenging to counter, but because it's so embarrassingly unserious. And yet, it still gets platformed. What we're watching isn't just bitterness or resentment. It's a weaponized caricature carefully curated to reinforce a worldview where progress is impossible, personal responsibility is irrelevant, and the only acceptable target of blame is whiteness itself. This isn't activism. It's spiritual rot masked as cultural critique. So let's call this for what it really is, a public ritual of projection. The irony is thick, accusing an entire race of insecurity, ignorance, and stealing, all while delivering a rant that's equal parts baseless, bitter, and plagiarized from Tumblr posts circa 2014. This is not a cry for justice, it's a therapy session turned performance art, except the audience is expected to nod solemnly while being accused of everything under the sun, from genocide to gentrification. But here's a deeper issue. Why is this kind of rhetoric not only tolerated but celebrated in certain circles of leftist media and academia? Because the modern progressive movement has built its cultural power on a very specific kind of moral hierarchy, one where victimhood equals virtue and historical grievance justifies present-day hostility. It's not about healing, it's about leverage. The goal is not to move forward together, it's to establish a new social pecking order where redemption is off limits and those born into the wrong skin. This obsession with racial original sin, where whiteness is inherently evil and blackness is forever perfect and oppressed, doesn't liberate anyone. It infantilizes one group while perpetually demonizing the other, creating a worldview so binary and cartoonish it will make a 1950s segregationalist blush. It also conveniently ignores inconvenient facts like the fact that The most violent and impoverished communities in America are often the ones most affected by left-wing policies. And guess what those are? Primarily minority communities. Just look at Chicago. Policies that defund the police, destroy education standards, and incentivize dependency while preaching empowerment. It ignores the real systemic abuse like the modern public school system, the fatherless crisis in the black community, and the cultural glorification of nihilism, which doesn't come from white people, but from institutions controlled and curated by primarily minority progressives. And here's where it gets even darker. This rhetoric, this simmering contempt for an entire race isn't just misguided. It's designed to keep people angry, divided, and emotionally stunted. Because angry people don't organize communities, they riot. Angry people don't build businesses, they burn them down. And angry people don't vote with clarity, they vote with vengeance. This is how the modern left maintains cultural power, by keeping the emotional temperature at a boil and then offering themselves as the only release valve in that situation. So when these activists accuse white people of violence, fear, and oppression, they're just making a bad argument. They're externalizing their own dysfunction onto a scapegoat. I mean, just look at the BLM riots. You don't need to look any further than that. But it's much easier for them to blame white people than to build for themselves. It's easier for them to accuse than to reflect. And it's a lot easier to destroy a statue or an entire city block than it is to actually build your own block of businesses. In a healthy culture, this video would be laughed out of town and wouldn't even be given any sort of attention. It would be seen for what it is: race-based hate speech wrapped in pseudo-intellectual dressing. But in this culture where outrage is currency and self-awareness is dead, it gets amplified. Not because it's true, but because it's a useful tool for the left's means to an end. And just in a time where America is finally trying to rebuild, these cultural parasites are still clawing at the foundation. And they will keep clawing until enough people, black, white, or otherwise, stand up and say enough is enough. You don't speak for everyone. You don't represent justice. Your idea of justice is extremely warped. And you sure as hell don't get to define morality while foaming at the mouth with racial hatred. And just to be absolutely clear, this isn't black empowerment. It's ideological poison. And the sooner we stop pretending it's anything else, the sooner we can start getting our country back. But guess what? When reality knocks on the door, people end up changing their minds very quickly, just like this former Democrat.
So you were a Democrat?
I was my whole life.
Really?
I first voted for Bill Clinton.
Jesus.
And voted Democrat every single year until, November.
And what do you think of Trump now? What do you think of his policies on deportation?
You know what? I can't tell you specifics about his policies, but what I will tell you is that it was not for Donald Trump, we might still be living next to gang members because everything changed after he was elected.
Wow.
So you feel a lot safer now that he's in the White House again?
I do, because he's taking it seriously.
Yeah.
The Democrats simply ignored it. They said it was lies. They won't talk to people who have been victimized by this.
Now, I know you said you were a gun owner.
I am.
Yeah. Are you a gun owner?
Now we are.
Wow.
This?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So you've turned from like a Democrat, Bill Clinton supporter to now a gun owner. Did you think that would happen?
Never in my life. I'm the last person, absolutely the last person. I used to have a group called Teachers United for Immigrant Rights. We can't just have anyone cross the border. And if they're showing us that their intentions are not to live in a peaceful way with us, then why not deport them? And so people are arguing about the policies of that, and they're talking about due process. But I think we need to look at, do we interpret due process for people who have crossed our border illegally differently than U.S. citizens? Because I think we also have due process, right? I mean, we're talking about the right to live peacefully.
Now, contrast what we just saw with what we saw earlier in the video from Jasmine Crockett. One clip was a career politician ranting about crypto conspiracies and beachfront Gaza property as she's narrating a fever dream. The other is a soft-spoken woman who's lived the consequences of Biden's open border ideology and changed her mind. Not out of partisanship, but out of survival. That's the difference between theory and reality. The ivory tower of the left pushes abstractions. Regular Americans are getting mugged by reality. This woman isn't some hardened conservative ideologue. She voted for Bill Clinton. She supported Kamala Harris. She ran a group called Teachers United for Immigrant Rights. This isn't someone who stumbled into Fox News talking points. This is someone who believed the narrative, lived under its policies, and paid the price. And that's the story of 2025. Millions of Americans waking up to the consequences of failed Democrat policies they were told were compassionate, only to find their neighborhoods overrun, their safety compromised, and their voices ignored. So what we're seeing here is a slow collapse of progressive moral fantasy. One that says anyone who questions immigration must be a bigot. Anyone who defends borders is a xenophobe. And anyone who talks about crime is fear-mongering. But when the theory meets your front door in the form of gang violence and lawlessness, the slogans completely fall apart. Suddenly, no human is illegal doesn't feel so profound when you're installing security cameras and having to buy your first firearm just to feel safe in your home. And yet, the Democrat machine continues gaslighting the public. They call stories like this anecdotal. They claim it's not a trend. They hide behind sanitized data while real people are burying the evidence of their failure. They'll run another slick campaign ad with Kamala dancing in sneakers, while families like this woman's have to arm themselves just to feel safe in their neighborhood. The disconnect isn't just political, it's moral. One side still believes in consequences, the other believes that they should be in control by any means necessary. Now, here's what's really happening. The left has become captive to its own ideological rigidity. I mean, we just saw it a moment ago in that video where they're claiming that whiteness is pure evil. They'd rather talk about that than anything else. And it shows that they can't adjust because their entire political identity is built on a fantasy of moral superiority. To admit failure would be to unravel the very premise of their movement. That's why they don't engage with people like this woman. They erase them from existence. They smear them. They pretend they don't exist. Oh, well, they're white. But they do exist. And their numbers are increasingly growing. And by the way, this is also a profound moment for independent voters, because what we're seeing isn't a left versus right issue anymore. It's a survival versus delusion issue. This woman didn't switch parties because of tax cuts or culture war theatrics. She switched because her government abandoned her and left her in a seriously dangerous position, because the people in charge stopped protecting citizens in favor of protecting the narrative that keeps them in power. And that's happening across the country, in blue suburbs, in border towns, in cities where fentanyl and trafficking have replaced opportunity and safety. And it should be absolutely undeniably clear that we got here because the Democrat Party became addicted to moral branding. It's not about what works, it's about what feels virtuous. And that's how we ended up with sanctuary cities that protect criminals, activist prosecutors, release repeat offenders, and federal policies that confuse border enforcement with cruelty. The entire system was re-engineered to serve optics over outcomes, and Americans are done paying the price for it. So when you hear the left obsessively calling white people the problem, or touting about how when they get the majority, they're going to impeach Trump, or bringing up January 6th for the gajillionth time, ranting about planes from Qatar, remember this woman, real Americans. She didn't change her mind because of cable news. She changed it because she was abandoned by a party more interested in virtue signals than public safety. And in the end, that may be the most dangerous lie of all. The one that tells people like her to sit down, shut up, and suffer in silence while the elites congratulate themselves on being inclusive. So to be clear, this isn't even a red wave. This is a reality, common sense wave. And the tide is only getting stronger. Because in case you haven't noticed, the left has been coming and will continue to come with more fervor after our religious freedoms. And this man that we're about to look at is a great example of how it's being done.
I started at Generac as a entry-level customer support agent. Within 3 years, I had as many promotions, like one every year, to the point where within 3 years, I was actually in leadership and I had 13 people directly reporting to me. My performance reviews were glowing.
Spencer Wimmer worked at Generac for almost 5 years and earned excellent performance reviews. But when he told his supervisor that his deeply held Christian beliefs prevented him from using the preferred names and pronouns of transgender employees, the company's opinion of him changed immediately.
There was never any complaint against me. What happened was my beliefs were discovered. I confided in my supervisor, who I had considered a friend, what my beliefs were.
Generac had no policy requiring employees to use any particular references when addressing other employees, and no employee complaint was ever filed against Spencer.
My focus was always on being professional, being respectful, and creating a professional work environment where we are going to improve as a team and just improve the company in general and have higher returns for the company.
Despite a sterling performance record, Generac fired Spencer just weeks after discovering his religious beliefs.
Actively went out of their way to remove me due to my beliefs. They considered me having these beliefs and my unwillingness to affirm the beliefs that they espoused to be harassment.
After terminating Spencer, the company immediately escorted him off of its premises.
Jesus.
Spencer's office items, including his personal Bible, were later returned to him badly damaged.
I go to church anytime they're open, very involved with the church community, Bible study consistently. Like, my faith is extremely important to me.
We believe that what Generac did to Spencer was unnecessary, inappropriate, and illegal under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
My faith has actually grown through this. Having to openly choose God, my love for God, over myself, over my job.
Spencer should not be forced to affirm the claimed gender identities of others over his own religious beliefs. Will has filed a complaint with United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission as the first step in securing for Spencer and so many others the right to be free from religious discrimination in the workplace.
This is infuriating, not just because of what happened to Spencer, but because it exposes the hollow shell of what corporate America has become. A man devoted to his job, quickly rising through the ranks, delivering excellent performance, gets fired not for what he did, but for what he believes. Let that sink in, folks. Spencer was respectful, professional, and by every objective measure, a model employee. But once his Christian convictions came to light, specifically his refusal to speak lies to preserve someone else's self-concept, he was branded as a threat and tossed aside like trash. That's not inclusion. That's ideological persecution. And here's the kicker. Generac had no policy requiring employees to use preferred pronouns. There were no complaints filed against Spencer. No misconduct, no violations, just a quiet admission of faith to his supervisor, who he considered a friend. That's all it took. In today's upside-down workplace culture, refusing to affirm someone else's delusion is now treated as a form of harassment. But violating your conscience, that's just diversity in action. And what happened to Spencer isn't an isolated incident. It's the product of a larger cultural virus, a social contagion. For over a decade, America's institutions, schools, HR departments, media outlets have been reprogrammed to see traditional religious beliefs as dangerous, even subversive. It's not enough to be kind, to do your job well, or to respect people. You must affirm. You must comply. You must celebrate every identity claim, no matter how delusional, no matter how strange, or how contradictory to reality, or hostile to your faith. And if you don't, you're a bigot. You're the problem. You're the one who gets escorted off the property while your Bible is tossed around like a prop in some dystopian skit. And to be clear, this is exactly what the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is meant to prevent. Title VII doesn't just protect people from racial and gender discrimination, it explicitly protects religious beliefs and practices. Spencer had every right to politely decline participation in someone else's ideology and delusion. He wasn't attacking anyone. He wasn't disrupting the workplace. He was simply drawing a line based on his faith, a quiet, respectful line rooted in conviction, and for that, he was made an example of. What this moment reveals is the deeply selective nature of the left's so-called tolerance, and I put that in quotes. The same institutions that scream about inclusion will blacklist you for quoting Genesis. The same companies that put rainbow flags in their logos every June will destroy your livelihood if you dare live out your faith 12 months a year. This isn't about equality. It's never been more evident that this is about ideological supremacy. And Christianity, especially in its unapologetic, scripture-rooted form, is the final obstacle to this cultural monopoly the left is trying to install in America. Spencer's story also exposes the failure of neutrality in today's institutions. There is no neutral ground anymore. There is no live and let live in HR policy. When a man can be fired for not saying something, we're no longer dealing with workplace etiquette. We're dealing with compelled speech. That's authoritarianism dressed up in diversity training. No other way to put it. And here's the uncomfortable truth for many Christians watching this. Silence is no longer an option. Spencer didn't go looking for a fight. The fight came to him. He didn't make a scene. The scene built around him and ejected him from the scene. And while that moment has already come for people like Spencer, make no mistake, that moment will also come for you and every single one of us who live by our faith, where you will be forced to choose between affirming your faith or affirming somebody else's delusion. And you better be ready, because you will suffer the consequences if you don't affirm the lie. But here's the good news. That lie is fragile. It needs constant reinforcement, constant punishment to keep itself relevant, constant fear to keep people in line. Because the second ordinary people like Spencer, like you and me, start standing firm, the whole thing starts to crack. And that's why stories like this matter, because Spencer didn't just lose his job, he gained a testimony. He exposed the game, and he reminded millions of Americans who follow and practice their faith what courage looks like in an age of cowardice. At the end of the day, Spencer's firing may have cost him a paycheck, but it gave the country something far more valuable: clarity. The mask is off. There's no question about it. The only thing left is who's next to stand up to this delusion. And don't think you won't have to stand up to it, because it is being pushed by the highest echelons of our media establishment. And they're out here singing praises to it and condemning anything that stands against it. And you need no greater proof than this commencement speech at Wake Forest given by Scott Pelley from 60 Minutes.
But in this moment, this morning, our sacred rule of law is under attack.
No, it's not.
Journalism is under attack.
No, it's not.
Universities are under attack.
No, they're not.
Freedom of speech is under attack.
No, it's not.
And insidious fear is reaching through our schools, our businesses, our homes, and into our private thoughts. The fear to speak. In America, power can rewrite history with grotesque, false narratives. They can make criminals heroes and heroes criminals.
You're talking about yourself, dude?
Power can change the definition of the words we use to describe reality. Diversity is now described as illegal. Equity is to be shunned. Inclusion is a dirty word. This is an old playbook, my friends. There's nothing new in this.
Well, that was a great performance. Terrific leftist theater from Scott Pelley, Legacy Media's most self-serious preacher, posing as a journalist. If you ever wondered what it looks like when a regime mouthpiece pretends to be the resistance, this is it. A multi-millionaire network anchor standing under the seal of a prestigious university protected by corporate media, government partnerships, and institutional clout, shaking with righteous indignation as he warns that he is the one under attack. This isn't journalism, by the way. It's narcissism with a press badge. And let's start with the irony. Pelley claims journalism is under attack as he delivers a speech that's being broadcast out to the world under the full protection of the First Amendment, with zero fear of censorship, arrest, or reprisal, as he openly criticizes the commander-in-chief. He laments that people are afraid to speak, as he literally gets applauded for speaking in front of a national audience. This is a classic inversion tactic of the modern left: cry persecution while wielding institutional power. As we saw just minutes ago, if you are a regular, everyday American with some common sense and you say men can't get pregnant, you will lose your job. Now, if Pelley says Trump is the devil, he gets a standing ovation and a book deal. This is the broader cultural moment we're living through, where legacy elites weaponize fear while monopolizing the microphone. Pelley isn't defending free speech, he's defending his monopoly on it. What he's really upset about is that alternative voices, Trump, independent media, even some rogue academics, are cutting through the narrative smog. And that scares them, because for decades, the left didn't have to argue. They just had to announce. And now people are asking questions, and suddenly that's a crisis. Now, the irony continues, folks, because Pelley claims the rule of law is under attack, but where was this sermon when left-wing DAs were refusing to prosecute violent criminals, especially here in LA? Where was his defense of law when Antifa mobs torched cities or when churches were shut down while abortion clinics stayed open during the pandemic? The rule of law only matters to people like him when it protects their side. When Trump enforces border security, it's authoritarianism. When Biden issued OSHA vaccine mandates with no constitutional basis, it was leadership. Their reverence for law is purely conditional and selectively applied. He claims diversity is now described as illegal, but what he means is race-based quotas and DEI bureaucracies are finally facing legal and cultural scrutiny. What he calls inclusion was never about welcoming anyone. It was about ideological vetting and moral gatekeeping. Try being a conservative student at one of these inclusive universities. You'll be labeled a threat before you even finish a sentence. This entire speech is a case study in projection. The left has spent years redefining words, changing woman to mean anything except an actual woman, labeling speech as violence, and declaring biological truth to be bigotry. They control academia, HR departments, big tech, and most of the entertainment industry. But now that their grip is slipping, now that people are no longer afraid to say what they think, they scream fascism and fear and rewriting history, as if they haven't been doing exactly that for a decade. And to be clear, this isn't even about protecting democracy. It's about protecting their monopoly on meaning. And the real reason people like Pelley are panicking is because they can't control the conversation anymore. You see, Pelley's speech is what happens when an empire feels its grip slipping. The sermonizing, the melodrama, the moral panic, it's not strength, it's pure desperation, and it shows us exactly how hollow the old institutions have become. When journalists start claiming themselves to be martyrs, universities become echo chambers, and the only speech worth protecting is their own, you know the system is rotting from the inside. So the real threat to free speech isn't coming from Trump. It's coming from the people who think they get to decide which speech is dangerous. From the people who preach tolerance while labeling half the country as extremists. From the people who weaponize fear to silence dissent. And then they call that journalism. And look, I don't think it's ever been more evident that America doesn't need more sermons from media elites like Pelley. We need truth, we need courage, and we need a generation of Americans who refuse to be bullied by the performative panic of people who spent far too long being applauded for their arrogance. The fear is real, but it's not coming from Scott Pelley. It's coming from the Americans he's afraid will finally stop listening to his BS. Anyway, all that being said, I think the most appropriate way to close this episode is with Jordan Peterson's latest appearance on Jubilee, a video that was initially titled 1 Christian versus 20 Atheists, and then later was changed to Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists. And I think it's important that we acknowledge the title before we watch the clip, because you will see Jordan Peterson run face first into the common Jordan Peterson fallacy. The one that he could very easily resolve, but we'll get to that in a second.
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
Somewhat.
Okay, you're familiar.
Their doctrines are very
how do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either you're a Christian or you're not.
I won't talk to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right, you're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Wow. What we just saw was Jordan Peterson, the man hailed by many as a voice of clarity and conviction, dodging the single most defining question of a worldview. Are you a Christian or not? And when asked directly, not by some hostile legacy journalist, but by an atheist during a debate looking for, I guess, supposedly honest dialogue, he sidesteps, deflects, and retreats into evasiveness. That moment says more about the cultural state of modern intellectualism than it does about Peterson himself, because it reveals the uncomfortable truth that in today's climate, even our boldest thinkers are often afraid to plant their flag in the ground. Now, to be clear, this was meant to be a gotcha moment. This atheist was trying to get Peterson, but in this debate format, that question is absolutely fair. The debate was framed as Christian versus atheist. Peterson attends Catholic Mass. He speaks at Christian conferences. He references Christ constantly. And yet, when pushed to identify, He plays coy, as if acknowledging belief would somehow collapse the whole house of reason he's built his career on. That hesitation isn't neutrality, it's timidity masquerading as complexity. Now, let's be clear. Peterson has done more than most to push back against the nihilism of the modern age. He's challenged postmodernism, stood against compelled speech laws, and made biblical archetypes accessible to a generation raised on Reddit. But moments like this are why cultural Christianity keeps losing ground. We have public intellectuals willing to use Christian language as aesthetic, but unwilling to submit to its truths. And when the rubber meets the road, when belief stops being safe and starts being costly, they blink. And I think from watching every clip we reacted to in this video, it's evident that this moment is much bigger than this man's hesitance. It speaks to a Western culture that's been trained to spiritualize everything except the actual Holy Spirit, where everyone wants the fruit of faith, meaning, order, and purpose, but few are willing to actually kneel before the source. We've reached a point where being interested in Catholicism is enough to sound deep, but saying Jesus Christ is King is too definitive, too binary, too offensive. And that's precisely the trap. The left has so effectively conditioned public discourse that even skeptics of woke ideology are still afraid of absolutes. The same institutions that promote 1,000 genders will mock a man who says he believes in one God. And many who should know better, scholars, authors, cultural critics, have learned to dance around truth rather than declare it openly with their full chest. Because we've been taught that conviction equals extremism and clarity equals intolerance. And let's not pretend that this is just about branding for Peterson. It's a worldview crisis. The Christian faith isn't a vague symbol for order and meaning. It's specific. It makes claims. It makes demands of its followers. It tells you who you are, who God is, and what your life exists for. And if you can't say out loud whether you believe in that or not, then don't be surprised when the culture you're trying to fix keeps crumbling beneath your feet. It's never been more evident that we're in desperate need of courage. Not just the courage to question bad ideas, but the courage to affirm true ones. Cultural Christianity, intellectual Christianity, mythological Christianity, none of it saves. Only Christ does. And at some point, everyone, whether they're sitting in a pew or on a debate stage, has to answer the question, who do you say that I am? If our smartest thinkers can't answer that, then they're not leading a movement, they're just narrating the decline. So the question now isn't just whether public figures like Peterson will take a stand, it's whether you will. In a culture that rewards ambiguity and punishes conviction, where truth is treated like a provocation and doubt is celebrated as wisdom, what does it cost to actually believe in something, in someone, to say that out loud? Are we so conditioned by the fear of being labeled, shamed, or misunderstood that we've forgotten how to speak plainly, let alone live boldly? The real battle isn't just out there in institutions or debates. It's internal, it's personal, and it's eternal. Who shapes our convictions? Who defines your reality? And when the moment comes to speak, will you echo the crowd or will you stand for truth? Like Spencer Weimer. So if you're tired of the noise, the confusion, the constant performance of modern culture, there's a better way. Not a philosophy, not a metaphor, the one. Jesus Christ isn't just a symbol of meaning. He is the truth and the life. And he doesn't ask for your performance, he asks for your heart. So don't just sit with the questions, take the step. Open the Bible, pray honestly, visit and talk to God. Ask God to reveal himself to you, and he will. In a world built on shifting sand, Christ is the only foundation that holds. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.